What if the strongest cage wasn't built from visible bars, but from repeated patterns inside the mind that feel so familiar you mistake them for yourself? The ancient Gnostics spoke of Archons as forces of distortion that kept the soul trapped in ignorance. But whether you read that literally, symbolically, or psychologically, the pattern remains the same. That pattern may be speaking through you, and until it's seen, the soul remains asleep inside a life it did not consciously choose. In the Gnostic vision, the soul does not fall asleep because it's weak. It falls asleep because it becomes surrounded by illusion. The divine spark enters the world of form, and slowly, layer by layer, it forgets its origin. It begins to identify with the body, the pain, and the system of thought it was born into. The soul enters a world of illusion and begins believing that this illusion is reality. The mind is given language before it is given wisdom. It is given fear before it is given understanding. It is given survival patterns before it is taught presence. And before the child can even question life, life has already installed 1,000 conclusions. You learn what love is from people who may not know how to love. You learn what safety is from environments that may not have been safe. You learn what God is from people who may have projected their fear onto the divine. And slowly, the mind forms a structure, a false architecture. This is where the Archons begin their work. Not as cartoon villains floating in the sky, but as repeating forces of distortion within perception. Fear, shame, and control become the rulers of the mind. And each one tells the soul, stay asleep. Don't look beyond this. This is all there is. That is why false patterns are so powerful. They don't simply create behavior. They create reality tunnels. A person trapped in shame doesn't just feel shame. They interpret everything through shame. A person trapped in fear doesn't just feel fear. They scan life for proof that fear is justified. A person trapped in abandonment doesn't just remember abandonment. They expect it. They prepare for it. And sometimes they recreate it before it can surprise them. This is how the soul falls asleep. The light isn't gone, but the lens has been darkened. A false pattern survives by convincing you that it's protecting you. Fear says, I am keeping you safe. Control says, I am keeping your life from falling apart. Shame says, I am making sure you know who you really are. But look closely. The thing claiming to protect you can also imprison you. How often has control blocked the peace you so desperately chase? How often has shame kept you small while pretending to keep you humble? The archonic pattern always has a counterfeit virtue. It doesn't usually appear as obvious darkness. It appears as logic. It appears as being realistic. It appears as, I'm just trying to not get hurt. And that's why people defend their chains. Because the chain has been rebranded as wisdom. But spiritual awakening requires brutal honesty. You must be willing to ask, is this actually discernment? Or is this fear wearing the mask of wisdom? Is this a boundary? Or is this avoidance? Is this intuition? Or is this trauma recognizing a familiar wound? The mind doesn't like these questions because they threaten the rulers inside it. Every false pattern wants to remain unconscious because a pattern loses its power the moment it's clearly seen. That's why awareness is dangerous to the illusion. The soul doesn't need to violently escape the mind. It needs to stop being hypnotized by it. The mind itself is not evil. It's a tool. But when the mind is ruled by fear, shame, and distortion, it becomes a false kingdom. It becomes the inner empire where the soul is forced to bow before the old programming. The true work is not to destroy the mind. The true work is to dethrone the false rulers. There comes a threshold where the soul begins to notice the loop. At first, it feels like discomfort. You react the same way, but something within watches it happen. You fall into the same fear, but something within knows this isn't the whole truth. You repeat the same inner collapse, but now there is a witness inside of you that doesn't believe the full story anymore. That witness is sacred. That witness is the beginning of liberation. The false pattern may still move through you, but you are no longer completely fused with it. This is the crack in the archonic spell. The moment you can say, a pattern is arising in me, instead of, this is who I am, space appears. And in that space, the soul begins to breathe. This is why awakening is often uncomfortable. Because the first stage of freedom is not bliss. It's recognition. You begin to see how much of your life has been lived from inherited fear, social programming, and unconscious repetition. That can be painful. But this pain is divine. It is the pain of the false self losing its throne. The revelation isn't, I have been broken. The revelation is, I have been identifying with what was never truly me. You are not your fear. You are not your trauma response. You are not the voice that tells you nothing will ever change. Those things may be moving through your field, but they are not the essence of your being. The divine spark was never destroyed. It was covered, conditioned, and buried beneath patterns that repeated so long they began to feel eternal. But no false pattern is eternal. Only truth is eternal. And when the soul begins to remember truth, the old rulers begin to tremble. Not because you attacked them, but because you finally stopped worshiping them. So, how does this reflect in your real life? It looks like pausing before you react. It looks like noticing when your mind creates a disaster before anything has even happened. It looks like catching the voice of shame and saying, I hear you, but you are not my God. This isn't passive. This is spiritual rebellion. The deepest rebellion is not screaming at the world. It is refusing to let unconscious patterns rule your inner kingdom. Because if the false pattern controls your perception, it controls your choices. And if it controls your choices, it controls your life. That is how the soul stays asleep. Not through one dramatic curse, but through repetition. One familiar fear. One unconscious reaction. One old identity reinforced again and again. But the same way repetition can enslave, conscious repetition can liberate. Each time you see the pattern without becoming it, the spell weakens. Each time you choose presence instead of panic, the soul gains ground. Each time you return to the monad, the false rulers lose authority. The Archons don't want to destroy you. They want you to believe every thought. They want you to obey every fear. They want you to confuse conditioning with destiny. They want you to call the cage home. But the soul was not created to sleep forever. Something within you knows when a pattern is false, even if that pattern has been with you for years. Something within you knows when shame is pretending to be humility. That knowing is the light returning to your being. Don't underestimate the power of seeing clearly. Clear seeing is the sword that cuts through the illusion. You don't have to defeat every pattern in one day. You only have to stop calling the pattern your true nature. Because you are not the prison. You are the light becoming conscious inside of it. And once the soul remembers that, the old rulers can no longer hold the throne. If this journey spoke to you, be sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone ready to experience life beyond thought. Comment below. What false pattern are you beginning to see clearly instead of blindly obeying? I read every comment. If you would like to support my work directly, you can do so at buymeacoffee.com/MagnumOpus333. Or you can explore some original merchandise at my Teespring store online. The link is in the description below. Or perhaps consider becoming a channel member or sending a super thanks. Any support is greatly appreciated. Remember, your consciousness is the key that unlocks reality. Let's keep unlocking it together. Thank you for watching. Until next time.